Watch how most people eat lunch, and you'll see the mistake happening in real time. Fast bites, minimal chewing, food swallowed in pieces large enough that your stomach has to do all the mechanical work your teeth were supposed to do first. This seems like a minor habit. Research says otherwise. A study on nut consumption found that normal chewing only ruptures about 11.5% of the cell walls in whole almonds. Cell walls that trap fat and nutrients inside. When those same almonds were ground into a fine paste, closer to 94% of the fat became available for absorption. The difference wasn't the food. It was how thoroughly it had been broken down before it ever reached the stomach. Every underchewed bite arrives in your stomach as a bigger, denser workload than it needs to be. That happens right at the exact moment your stomach has less acid available to break it down. You've essentially doubled the job for an organ already operating at reduced capacity. Most people never connect these two facts. They just notice they feel worse after eating quickly and assume it's stress or the food itself. There's a second habit working against you, and it's one that feels responsible. Drinking a large glass of water right alongside a meal. Staying hydrated matters. But flooding your stomach with liquid during a meal dilutes the acid concentration at the exact moment you need it working at full strength. For a digestive system already producing less acid than it used to, that dilution can be the difference between adequately broken down food and food that moves on only partially digested. Then there's the habit that feels like the solution, but often isn't. Reaching for an antacid every time bloating shows up. Antacids and the stronger acid-blocking medications many people take daily for years work by reducing stomach acid production. If your stomach was already producing too much, that would help. But you now know that for a large share of adults over 50, the actual problem runs in the opposite direction. Long-term acid suppression, used to treat a symptom that often stems from too little acid to begin with, can deepen the very deficit causing the bloating in the first place. This is not a criticism. Nobody teaches you this. The commercials tell one story. The biology of an aging digestive system tells another. The last habit is the quietest one, and maybe the most common. Doing nothing differently at all. Continuing to eat the exact same way you did at 35. Assuming your gut still processes food the same way it always has, because nothing forced you to question it. Your gut has changed, even when your habits haven't. The good news is that every one of these mistakes is reversible. Not through a supplement aisle full of promises, but through specific evidence-backed adjustments to how, when, and what you eat. That's exactly where this goes next. Here is the part almost nobody explains to you. The bloating showing up after nearly every meal is not about the food itself. It's about a single organ that used to work harder than you ever noticed. It has been quietly losing capacity for years. Your stomach. Most people assume digestion slowing down is a vague, unavoidable feature of getting older. It's the kind of thing your doctor mentions in passing, then moves on to the next item on a 15-minute appointment. Nobody explains the actual mechanism, because it takes longer than 15 minutes to explain. Here it is. Deep inside the lining of your stomach are millions of specialized cells called parietal cells. Their job is producing hydrochloric acid, the strong fluid that breaks down protein, kills bacteria that hitch a ride in your food, and signals the rest of your digestive tract to start working. These cells sit in the stomach wall in enormous numbers, and for most of your adult life, you never had to think about them. They simply did their job meal after meal, without complaint. That changes. Starting somewhere in your 50s, these cells begin declining in both number and function. Research shows that between 30 and 50% of adults over 60 have a measurable degree of low stomach acid, a condition called hypochlorhydria. One study out of Japan found something even more striking. 40% of adults over 50 had almost no detectable stomach acid at all. Compare that to something more familiar. Hair turning gray after 50 is common, and nobody argues that gray hair means nothing is happening. It's a visible sign of a real biological shift. Stomach acid decline works the same way. It's common precisely because it's a real, measurable change, not because nothing is going on beneath the surface. The difference is that you can see gray hair in a mirror. You cannot see a weakening gait in your stomach. You can only feel its consequences 20 minutes after a meal. This is where most people get the story backward. For decades, the assumption has been that digestive discomfort after 50 comes from too much stomach acid. Endless commercials reinforced it. Reach for the pink liquid. Reach for the purple pill. Turn the acid down. But research on aging digestion tells a different story. The problem for most adults in this age range isn't excess acid. It's the opposite. Your stomach is producing less of the very substance it needs to break food down completely and to keep harmful bacteria from surviving the trip through your gut. This matters more than it sounds like it should. Stomach acid isn't just a digestive fluid. It's a gatekeeper. At full strength, it creates an environment so hostile that almost nothing survives passage through it. No stray bacteria. No undigested protein fragments. Nothing that doesn't belong further down the line. When that gate weakens, everything downstream changes. Undigested protein sits in your stomach longer than it should. Bacteria that would have been destroyed on contact make it through alive. Your small intestine, a place meant to stay relatively low in bacterial population, starts hosting organisms that don't belong there in those numbers. This is not a hypothetical. It's measurable. And it has a name. Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. SIBO for short. This is also why the discomfort described in this video often looks nothing like classic heartburn. Heartburn involves acid moving somewhere it shouldn't, up into the esophagus. What's being described here is close to the opposite. Not enough acid reaching the stomach's job in the first place. Two very different mechanisms, producing two very different feelings, and yet both get lumped into the same vague category of stomach trouble by the time most people describe it to a doctor. Once bacteria establish themselves somewhere they shouldn't be, they do what bacteria always do with the food you eat. They ferment it. Fermentation produces gas. Gas needs somewhere to go. That pressure, that tightness, that swollen feeling 20 minutes after a meal, that's the physical signature of fermentation happening in the wrong part of your gut. You didn't do anything wrong by eating lunch. Your gut simply doesn't have the same first line of defense it had 30 years ago. There's a version of this story where your gut has been trying to tell you something specific in a language most people were never taught to read. The next part of that story happens further down, in the section of your digestive tract that decides how long everything sits, ferments, and builds pressure before it finally moves on. Think of your digestive tract as a highway system with a strict, unspoken speed limit. In your 30s, traffic moved. Food passed through your stomach, into your small intestine, through your colon, and out, on a schedule your body had followed since childhood. You never had to think about it. It just worked. That speed limit changes with age, and almost nobody warns you about it. Research measuring colonic transit time, how long it takes waste to move through your large intestine, shows it lengthening in a clear, measurable way decade after decade, beginning in midlife. It's not a dramatic overnight shift. It's a slow compounding drag, the kind that adds up to real hours over the span of 10 or 20 years. Slower transit sounds harmless. It isn't. The longer anything sits in a warm, moist environment full of bacteria, the more time those bacteria have to feed, multiply, and ferment whatever's available. This is precisely why small intestinal bacterial overgrowth becomes so much more common as people age. Research using breath testing found SIBO in 15.6% of elderly patients. That's compared to just 5.9% of younger adults, nearly 3 times the rate. That is not a small difference. That is a different digestive reality entirely. Timing matters here too. Fermentation-driven bloating tends to follow a predictable pattern. Minimal discomfort in the first few minutes after eating. Then, a noticeable buildup somewhere between 20 minutes and 2 hours later as bacteria further down the tract get to work on whatever wasn't fully broken down earlier in the chain. That delay is often the clue that separates this kind of bloating from an immediate reaction to a specific food. Here's the part that connects everything back to the bloating you feel after meals. When bacteria in your small intestine ferment carbohydrates that should have already been absorbed higher up, they produce hydrogen and methane gas as a byproduct. Some bacteria produce mostly hydrogen, others produce methane. The exact mix matters less than the outcome. That gas doesn't have anywhere convenient to go. It pushes against the walls of your intestine. Your abdomen visibly distends. The sensation is not in your head. It is gas, physically present, physically expanding a space that used to move things through efficiently. There's a second consequence that rarely gets mentioned, and it has nothing to do with comfort. Those same parietal cells that produce stomach acid also produce something called intrinsic factor, a protein your body needs to absorb vitamin B12. The two aren't cause and effect. They're two separate jobs handled by the same cells, running side by side. But acid still plays a critical role in this story. Vitamin B12 arrives in food bound tightly to protein, and it's stomach acid that pulls it free. Without enough acid, B12 stays locked to that protein and can pass through your system without ever being released, whether or not intrinsic factor is available to carry it the rest of the way. Low acid, in other words, can quietly choke off B12 absorption at the very first step, right at the exact stage of life when B12 deficiency starts contributing to fatigue, memory changes, and nerve issues that get blamed on just getting older. A tingling in the hands, a harder time concentrating by mid-afternoon, a tiredness that sleep doesn't seem to fix. These are frequently treated as separate, unrelated complaints, when the same weakening gait in your stomach may be quietly connected to all of them. The bloating, the slower transit, the B12 concern. These aren't 3 separate problems. They're 3 visible symptoms of the same underlying shift. A digestive system that used to move fast and defend itself aggressively is now moving slower and defending itself less. None of this shows up on a standard blood panel. Doctors rarely test for it unless you specifically ask. There's no 15-minute conversation that covers parietal cell decline, transit time, and bacterial overgrowth in a way that fits a routine appointment. The story stays untold, and the bloating gets filed under normal aging. It isn't. It's a chain reaction with a beginning, a middle, and, as you're about to see, a set of everyday habits that either interrupt that chain or accelerate it without you realizing. Watch how most people eat lunch, and you'll see the mistake happening in real time. Fast bites. Minimal chewing. Food swallowed in pieces large enough that your stomach has to do all the mechanical work your teeth were supposed to do first. A working lunch eaten at a desk in 8 minutes. A dinner finished before the television show it was paired with reaches its first commercial break. Nobody plans to eat this way. It simply becomes the default once eating slowly stopped feeling like a priority years ago. This seems like a minor habit. Research says otherwise. A study on nut consumption found that normal chewing only ruptures about 11.5% of the cell walls in whole almonds, cell walls that trap fat and nutrients inside. When those same almonds were ground into a fine paste, closer to 94% of the fat became available for absorption. The difference wasn't the food. It was how thoroughly it had been broken down before it ever reached the stomach. Every under-chewed bite arrives in your stomach as a bigger, denser workload than it needs to be. That happens right at the exact moment your stomach has less acid available to break it down. You've essentially doubled the job for an organ already operating at reduced capacity. Most people never connect these two facts. They just notice they feel worse after eating quickly and assume it's stress or the food itself. There's a second habit working against you, and it's one that feels responsible: drinking a large glass of water right alongside a meal. Staying hydrated matters, but flooding your stomach with liquid during a meal dilutes the acid concentration at the exact moment you need it working at full strength. Picture stirring a glass of concentrated juice with more and more water. At some point, it stops tasting like juice at all. Your stomach acid faces the same dilution problem at the exact meal where it needs to be strongest. For a digestive system already producing less acid than it used to, that dilution can be the difference between adequately broken down food and food that moves on only partially digested. Then there's the habit that feels like the solution, but often isn't: reaching for an antacid every time bloating shows up. Antacids, and the stronger acid-blocking medications many people take daily for years, work by reducing stomach acid production. If your stomach was already producing too much, that would help. But you now know that for a large share of adults over 50, the actual problem runs in the opposite direction. Long-term acid suppression, used to treat a symptom that often stems from too little acid to begin with, can deepen the very deficit causing the bloating in the first place. There's a further twist that makes this habit especially hard to break. Research on the strongest class of these medications, proton pump inhibitors, found that 40 to 50% of healthy volunteers developed new digestive symptoms after stopping the medication, not because their original problem returned, but because the body had adjusted to the suppressed acid environment and temporarily overcorrected once the medication stopped. Researchers call this rebound acid hypersecretion. In plain terms, stopping the pill can feel worse than continuing it, which is exactly what keeps so many people on it indefinitely, even when it may no longer be addressing the actual cause of their discomfort. This is not a criticism. Nobody teaches you this. The commercials tell one story. The biology of an aging digestive system tells another. There's a fourth habit, quieter than the rest: cutting out fiber-rich vegetables and legumes because they seem to make bloating worse in the short term. It's an understandable response. Nobody wants more discomfort after a meal that already left them uncomfortable. But those same foods feed the beneficial bacteria that compete against the overgrowth driving the problem in the first place. Removing them can bring short-term relief while quietly starving the exact microbial balance your gut needs to recover. The last habit is the quietest one, and maybe the most common. Doing nothing differently at all. Continuing to eat the exact same way you did at 35. Assuming your gut still processes food the same way it always has, because nothing forced you to question it. Your gut has changed even when your habits haven't. The good news is that every one of these mistakes is reversible. Not through a supplement aisle full of promises, but through specific evidence-backed adjustments to how, when, and what you eat. That's exactly where this goes next. Here's what actually changes this, not eventually, but starting with your next meal. The first shift costs nothing and takes no supplement. Chewing until your food genuinely changes texture, not just until it's small enough to swallow. Research on mastication and nutrient absorption is consistent. Food broken down more thoroughly releases dramatically more of its available nutrients. It also arrives in your stomach as a lighter workload for an organ already working with less acid than it used to have. Chewing also triggers saliva production, and saliva itself contains enzymes that begin breaking down carbohydrates before food ever reaches your stomach. A head start your stomach badly needs right now. Aim for noticeably more chewing per bite than feels natural at first. It will feel slow. That's the point. Digestion begins in your mouth, not your stomach. And for the first time in years, you're going to let it. The second shift involves an ingredient most people already have in their kitchen: fresh ginger. In a controlled study on patients with functional dyspepsia, the medical term for the fullness, bloating, and discomfort many people experience after eating, ginger measurably sped up gastric emptying. Stomachs cleared their contents in just over 12 minutes on average with ginger, compared to over 16 minutes without it. That's not a marginal difference. That's your stomach moving food along meaningfully faster, reducing the window bacteria have to ferment anything sitting inside it. A few slices of fresh ginger steeped in hot water before a meal, or grated into your cooking, gives your stomach a documented head start. The third shift is about timing, not restriction. Separating most of your water intake from the meal itself. Drink well throughout your day. This isn't about drinking less overall. During the meal, keep liquid modest, so the acid your stomach does produce isn't diluted at the exact moment it needs to be at working strength. A small glass alongside food is enough. Save the larger glass for 30 minutes before or after eating. The fourth shift addresses the bacteria question directly. Fermented foods, plain yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, anything with live cultures, introduce beneficial bacterial strains that compete for space with the kind of bacteria responsible for excess gas production. This doesn't reverse SIBO overnight, but it shifts the balance of your gut environment in a direction that works with you instead of against you. Start small if fermented foods feel unfamiliar. A few tablespoons alongside a meal is enough to begin shifting that balance without overwhelming a sensitive gut. The fifth shift is the one most people resist because it sounds too simple. Eating smaller portions more frequently rather than 2 or 3 large meals. A smaller volume of food is a workload your reduced stomach acid can actually keep up with. A large meal, especially one heavy in protein, asks an already strained system to do more than it currently can. This doesn't mean eating less overall. It means spreading the same food across more, smaller sittings. The last shift takes 10 minutes. walking, even gently, for a short stretch after eating. Movement stimulates the muscular contractions that move food through your digestive tract, the same motility that naturally slows with age. You're not exercising. You're giving your gut a mechanical assist it used to get for free from a younger, faster metabolism. None of these require a prescription. None of them require giving up entire food groups. Put together, they form a simple sequence. Chew thoroughly. Sip ginger tea before eating. Keep water modest during the meal. Add a small serving of something fermented. Keep the portion reasonable, and take a short walk afterward. That's the entire approach. No supplement aisle required. Just a different rhythm around the same foods you already eat. None of these shifts work as a one-time fix. Give them roughly 2 to 3 weeks of consistent practice before judging results. That's approximately how long it takes for a shifted gut environment to meaningfully change the fermentation pattern responsible for the bloating in the first place. Some people notice a difference within days. For others, especially with more established bacterial overgrowth, the timeline runs longer, and that's normal too. Here is the piece of this story that changes how you'll think about every antacid commercial you've ever seen. Research published in a major medical journal found that more than 30% of adults over 60 have atrophic gastritis. That's a condition where the stomach lining itself becomes damaged, and acid-producing cells stop functioning at anywhere near full capacity. Separate research shows the rate of clinically significant low stomach acid nearly triples once you cross from your 50s into your 60s. Now place that fact next to this one. Proton pump inhibitors, the strongest class of acid-suppressing medication, rank among the most prescribed drugs on Earth. Millions of adults in exactly this age range take them daily, often for years, frequently without ever being reevaluated to see if they still need them. For someone whose stomach is already producing significantly less acid due to age alone, adding a medication whose entire purpose is suppressing acid further doesn't resolve the bloating. It can deepen the exact deficit driving it. And as you learned earlier, the medication itself can make stopping feel worse than continuing, which is exactly why so many prescriptions quietly turn into years-long habits nobody revisits. This is the inversion most people never hear about. The instinct, reinforced by decades of marketing, is to treat digestive discomfort as a problem of excess. Turn the acid down. Calm the fire. But for a large share of adults over 50, the fire was never the problem. The fire was already low, and the response has been to put it out further. Think about what that means for someone who has spent years reaching for the same bottle after every meal, convinced they were finally managing the issue. The bloating never fully goes away. It just gets quieter for a few hours, then returns tomorrow because the actual mechanism was never addressed. It was buried under a solution built for the opposite problem, and every time the discomfort returns, the instinct is to reach for more of the same solution, rather than question whether it was ever the right one. This single inversion, mistaking too little for too much, may be the single most common misunderstanding in digestive health for adults over 50. It's rarely stated this directly because it complicates a very simple, very profitable message. Something is burning, so put it out. But your gut isn't burning. It's running low. Picture two candles side by side. One burns strong and needs to be dimmed. The other is already down to its last flicker and needs to be protected, not extinguished. For decades, Digestive health messaging has treated every uncomfortable stomach as the first candle. For a large share of adults over 50, it's actually the second. There's a reason this default persists beyond marketing alone. A short appointment rewards a fast answer, and take this to reduce your acid is faster to say than explaining parietal cell decline, SIBO, and transit time. Patients often expect to leave with a prescription. Doctors, working within a system that measures visits in minutes, often provide one. None of this is malicious. It's simply a system built for speed, applied to a problem that actually requires explanation. The mechanism that helps you here is the same one working against you when ignored. Your stomach's acid production is not entirely fixed. Chewing thoroughly, incorporating naturally gastric emptying foods like ginger, and spacing water away from meals are not small lifestyle tweaks. They're direct interventions on the exact mechanism research has identified as the root of the problem. The bloating isn't a mystery your body is failing to explain. It's information, delivered in the only language your gut has available. Pressure, discomfort, and timing that lines up precisely with when the breakdown in the chain occurs. Most people will spend years treating the symptom without ever hearing the mechanism explain this clearly. You just did. That single piece of information, that the fire was already low, is worth more than any bottle on the shelf, because it changes the entire strategy from here forward, not just the next uncomfortable evening. What you do with it from here determines whether this becomes the year the bloating finally makes sense, or one more year of blaming a meal that was never really the problem to begin with. There's a reason this channel keeps returning to your gut, video after video, instead of jumping between a dozen unrelated health trends. Your intestinal tract isn't an isolated system operating in its own corner of your body. Roughly 90% of your body's serotonin is produced there, not in your brain. The same bacterial environment influences how efficiently you absorb the nutrients keeping your bones, brain, and heart running. It shapes how much low-grade inflammation is circulating through your bloodstream on any given day. A gut working against you doesn't just cause an uncomfortable hour after lunch. Over months and years, it quietly touches mood, energy, and the pace at which the rest of your body ages. This is the thread connecting nearly everything covered on this channel. Whether the video is about liver function, joint stiffness, sleep quality, or memory. The gut isn't one organ among many. It's the connection point that touches almost all the others, quietly influencing systems that seem, on the surface, to have nothing to do with digestion at all. When someone tells you their 50s and 60s feel different, heavier, foggier, less resilient than a decade before, there's a real chance part of that story starts in exactly the chain reaction you just learned about. Not the whole story, but a real, measurable piece of it, hiding behind a symptom most people were taught to ignore. Picture what it looks like when someone finally addresses this at the root instead of the symptom. Years of reaching for antacids after every dinner, assuming their gut had simply gotten weaker with no real explanation available. Meals became something to plan around, smaller portions out of caution, certain foods avoided out of fear rather than understanding, always with a bottle of something nearby just in case. Then, understanding what was actually happening. The acid decline, the slower transit, the bacterial overgrowth filling the gap. The response stops being guesswork. Chewing more deliberately. Ginger before heavier meals. Water spaced away from eating. Fermented foods added consistently, not occasionally. A short walk instead of sitting straight back down. Within weeks, not years, meals stopped being something to brace for. That shift alone, from bracing for a meal to simply enjoying it, is a kind of freedom most people stopped expecting somewhere in their 50s, quietly assuming it was gone for good. That's not a dramatic transformation story. It's what happens when you finally treat the actual mechanism instead of managing the discomfort it produces. And it's a pattern that shows up again and again in the research behind this channel. Symptoms that seem separate: bloating, fatigue, foggy thinking, restless sleep, often trace back to the same handful of systems working harder than they should, gut health chief among them. This channel exists because most health content built for adults over 50 either oversimplifies the science down to a single scary headline or skips the mechanism entirely and jumps straight to a product. Neither one actually explains what's happening inside your body or why. That's the gap this channel is built to fill. One real mechanism at a time, backed by research, not guesswork, video after video. That's also why nothing here ever points you toward a proprietary blend, a subscription box, or a single miracle ingredient. The recommendations in this video are foods you can buy at any grocery store this afternoon, because that's the entire premise of food as medicine. The tools were never missing. What was missing was the explanation of how and why they work. No affiliate link replaces that explanation, and no channel built on real research needs one to. If this video gave you a piece of the explanation nobody else bothered to give you, staying connected means you'll get the next piece too, and the one after that. The habits, the mechanisms, and the research that most 15-minute appointments never have time to cover. There's one more part of this puzzle left, and it ties everything back to where we started. The moment your stomach feels swollen 20 minutes after a meal, and what that moment has actually been trying to tell you the entire time. Go back to the moment this video opened with. Your stomach, 20 minutes after a meal, swollen and tight in a way that used to never happen. You now know what that feeling actually is. Not failure, not simply getting older. It's a precise physical signal. Acid running lower than it used to, transit running slower than it used to, bacteria filling a gap that used to be defended. All of it converging in that one uncomfortable moment after you eat. Your gut has been honest with you this entire time. It just never had the vocabulary before. And neither did you. Think back to every time you second-guessed a meal, avoided a dinner invitation out of quiet dread, or made an excuse to skip dessert, not because you didn't want it, but because you already knew what would follow. None of that was overreacting. It was a reasonable response to a real, physical pattern your body had been repeating for years. Every uncomfortable meal was information, not punishment. Every tight waistband after dinner was your body pointing directly at the mechanism, waiting for someone to finally translate it. A stomach that used to digest anything without a second thought isn't betraying you. It's asking for a different kind of support than it needed 20 years ago. It has been asking quietly, every single day, in the only way it knows how. There's a particular kind of relief that comes from finally understanding something your body has been doing for years without explanation. Not because the discomfort disappears overnight, it won't. But because confusion itself carries its own weight. And that weight lifts the moment a real mechanism replaces a vague shrug of, that's just aging. That's the real difference between managing a symptom and understanding it. Managing means reacting the same way every time, indefinitely, without ever asking why. Understanding means the reaction can finally change because you know what you're actually responding to. One of those paths leads to the same drugstore shelf for the next 20 years. The other leads somewhere different. Most people will never trace that feeling back to its source. They'll manage it for another decade with the same bottle from the same drugstore shelf, never once hearing the actual mechanism explained. They'll keep blaming the meal, the stress, the getting older, anything but the actual chain of events happening beneath the surface. You already have the explanation, they don't. That puts you in a different position than you were in 20 minutes ago. Not because anything about your gut has changed yet, but because you finally understand what it's been asking for. The 6 shifts you just learned. Chewing thoroughly. Ginger before meals. Water spaced away from eating. Fermented foods. Smaller portions. A short walk afterward. Aren't a program you either complete or fail. They're a new baseline. Start with 1 tonight. Add the next tomorrow. Within a few weeks, the version of eating that once left you reaching for your belt will feel like something that used to happen to someone else. Healing from the roots was never about a single dramatic fix. It's about understanding the quiet mechanisms your body has been running for decades and giving them the specific support they're actually asking for. 1 meal, 1 habit, 1 video at a time. Now you can hear it. If today's conversation gave you something no one else has explained this clearly, follow this channel. New videos on exactly this kind of research arrive every few days. Send this to someone over 50 who's been blaming every meal instead of understanding what's actually happening inside their gut. There's a good chance they've never heard a single part of this explained before. Leave a comment telling us what you want explained next. A symptom you've been told is just aging. A habit you're not sure is helping or hurting. A question your last doctor's appointment didn't have time for. This channel exists to answer exactly those questions, 1 video at a time, with real research behind every answer. Your gut has been talking to you for years. This is the first time anyone bothered to translate what it was saying. This video is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice. Always consult a healthcare professional.